Welcome to NucleCast, the official podcast of the ANWA Deterrence Center. Each week, we bring you leading experts for a lively discussion on topics related to strategic nuclear deterrence. Our host is Dr. Adam Lowther, Director of Strategic Programs at the National Strategic Research Institute. The views of the hosts and the guests are their own.
Welcome back to another exciting episode of NucleCast. Of course, I am your host, Adam Lowther, and today we are joined by three fellows at NNSA, Omar Castillo, Jade Fortiner, and Major Bryce Akers. And we've asked them to join us today because we've had some discussions on past episodes of NucleCast where we've talked about workforce development, workforce retention. How do we get young people to come into the DOD and to the DOE? And how do we get them interested in weapons design or working the programs for modernization, or even Major Bryce Young, one of our guests today. He's a 13 November. He's a missileer. And so how do we get folks interested in wanting to do this? And so with that, I want to welcome y'all into the show. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Adam, thanks for having us.
So we've got sort of two groups. Omar and Jade, you're part of a fellowship with NNSA that's administered by Pacific Northwest National Labs, one of the national labs. And then Bryce, you're a major in the U.S. Air Force, and you're at NNSA as an Air Force fellow. So we've got two groups. Let me offer to you, Omar and Jade, first. So your recent college, you've gone through graduate school, and your recent graduates, and this is sort of your introduction into the nuclear enterprise. What interested y'all in coming into the nuclear enterprise? And Omar, you're the first face I see, so why don't you go ahead and go first?
Okay, so I'll talk about my unique experience. So my experience is rather unique, just like everyone else's here today, right? So for me, I was finishing up my last year of my graduate program in software engineering, and an email came abroad. And of course, I opened it and it said there was an opportunity for an internship at the NNSA as a MISSIP intern. So of course, I think I was just working on a recent I was doing software structural design for radar systems. So I thought, you know what, this sounds rather interesting because it's defense programs. So, of course, I reached out to one of my advisors, Professor Dr. Ning Chen, and he definitely recommended me to, he thought I'd be a great fit. And, of course, with all the exciting things that is going on in nuclear, he thought, it'd be a great benefit to me. So, of course, I applied, and then here we are. So, of course, I was an intern last year for the Office of Management and Budget here at the NSA. And then that step led to this step. So I applied for the NGFP program. And of course, now I'm on NA 122, which is the Stockpile services. And in this division, I help the efforts of maintenance of the stockpile, more particular surveillance and maintenance as well. So that's kind of just my little journey of how I got here.
All right. Thanks, Omar. Jade?
Yeah, so I was finishing up, I guess, my fall semester in my final year of my master's in public administration at the University of Georgia. And during my lunch break one day, there just happened to be an info session. I just kind of went for fun. I had my eyes pretty set on another job across the country. Showed up, and I didn't even know the NNSA existed prior, which I guess is part of the problem. But my dad was actually a nuclear engineer in the Navy my entire life. So he was like, well, that sounds cool. Why not? And I was like, sure, why not? I had no government experience aside from working for the University of Georgia, which I guess technically is a state entity. And then it kind of was like everyone gets an interview. Oh, we're all fellows. And then I actually learned what a cool program this is. So I currently work in the Office of Defense Programs front office on some executive correspondence, congressional reports, and serve as the primary point of contact between our production modernization office and our defense programs leadership.
Awesome. Thanks. Now, Bryce, of course, I'm familiar with your program, but could you tell the audience what it is that brings you to NNSA?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So for us, like you mentioned in the Air Force, a little bit different, kind of same application process in the intermediate development time frame. So as a major, you get your chance at going to another school, a couple different ones, but applied to the Air Force Fellowship Program, which is a very large program. There's fellows all over at, educational institutions, at think tanks, at the national labs, working with State Department. So I got lucky and got picked up to be at NNSA headquarters. And our role there is kind of, we get the overview of the whole gamut of what NNSA does. We focus in with defense programs, but it really helps us see how the DoD coordinates with the Department of Energy, and then the other way around, how the DOE supports and how that they work together to get the mission accomplished. So it's a great opportunity, and I'm really enjoying the 6 months I've been in it so far.
Yeah, and you're lucky to have Stacy Joe there during your time there. So she's been on the show, obviously, and she's a great leader.
Yes, absolutely.
Let me ask y'all as a whole. So one of the big challenges that we're having now is it's both for DoD, whether it's for DoD, whether it's bringing in, our recruitment numbers are down. And so the military's, we're undermanned right now. Whether it's looking at, say, the labs are always working, particularly given the modernization programs. So bringing in and growing the labs, growing the engineers and scientists that we have. NNSA has a huge management responsibility, technical management over all of these programs. And so national security science and national security writ large, even the defense contractors who support all these programs by developing systems, are always trying to bring in and retain talent. Do you have any advice? Because many of our listeners are pretty senior folks in and across these companies, agencies, departments. How would you tell them to, attract and retain young talent? Omar, you want to kick us off again?
I'd love to kick you off, but I think maybe Major Bryce has probably maybe a better and then back off of his. And the only reason is because I don't want to steal his thunder. I think he has a great perspective on this question.
All right, Bryce, we'll go to you first then.
Yeah, so we had talked, last week, and I think that's what Omar's leading to. But I think a big one, it's awareness. Kind of like how Jade mentioned, hadn't really heard of it before, got the opportunity. I think it's awareness of it's the enterprise total, but it's also all the different locations where you can work and in different kinds of work. I think that's the big one is, from what I've seen so far, it's if you want to work with your hands, you go to Pantex and you go to Pantex and you can work with your hands assembling and disassembling weapon systems, or you go to Kansas City and you work in their plants there putting things together. Or if you're graced with a big brain and you can do those big thinkings and work on those problems, you go to one of the labs and you can work on the problems from design and from physics. But those labs aren't just nuclear. They're doing amazing things elsewhere. You saw the recent announcement about the fusion reaction, or they're working with NASA on other things like that. I think the big part is awareness of the industry is here, and here's all the different things that you can do inside of it. I was thinking about this today. Is we're also in a time frame where, as growing up, we haven't had to think about great power competition for the last 30 years, and how the nuclear deterrence environment kind of underpins national security and the national defense strategy, and reintroducing that concept of how it plays into this new realm that we're finding ourselves in, I think will really raise that awareness of the importance of getting into this and the opportunities in the environment.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's a good point. Omar?
Yeah, and if I can now piggyback off of what he just said, and we were having this discussion, and yeah, of course, I would have to agree that it's awareness. Like Jade and I mentioned in our intro, I mean, we didn't know too much about the NNSA or what they even did. Of course, when we think of the big scientific powerhouse, we were always thinking of NASA, right? But the NNSA is right up there with NASA. I mean, the things that we do are extremely important to national defense and, of course, to deterrence. And so one thing I'd like to bring to the spotlight is the NNSA and NASA actually work together. They actually are involved in the NNSA and NASA planetary defense system. So this defense system is actually in place for national security, and I think maybe overall for perhaps the world. But they're in charge for detecting asteroids. And so people maybe not understand, but if you're interested, you can be a part of this effort. And it deals with either if you're a nuclear explosive expert or perhaps high computing, that's a field too. So I think a lot of it is definitely we need to introduce and reinvigorate our organization and bring in more fresh ideas and maybe get a marketing effort out there, right? Maybe a campaign effort too as well. So I think all ideas I think are strongly welcomed, right? And I look forward to hear what Jade maybe has to say about this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that another component that kind of should be focused more on in general in all workspaces is it's not just about getting people to the place. You have to make them want to stay there, and you have to get people invested, especially in national security. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into this, and there's a lot of moving parts. I mean, I've been in this job for 6 months, and I still feel like every day there's something new that I didn't know yesterday. So having people come in and out isn't really going to be super beneficial. So I think one of the coolest things that I've realized, at least in DP specifically, is the focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility initiatives. We have monthly programming for that. But there's also just like cool events that you can go to meet your coworkers now that we kind of have like an integrated teleworking versus in-person workspace, so that you can still meet those colleagues that maybe you don't have the opportunity to work in person with all the time. And I mean, it's definitely been enough to convince me that this is somewhere that I'm invested in and I want to stick around. So I think Bryce really got the getting you there, and Omar with a couple other ideas on that. But I think it's important to think about how to keep people there too.
Now, if y'all were to sit down, if you can imagine that we're sitting at a round table with the administrator, and she's asked you to figure out how she solves her manpower challenge. And she gets all these, young chipper folks because, the labs, NNSA, they're, I think the number is something like half or 3/4 of the workforce can retire within the next 5 years. So she's going to need a lot of young folks. What would you, if you were going to give her 3 big ideas in terms of do these 3 specific actionable things, what kind of actionable things would you say would be useful to bring in the kind of workforce that she needs? You want to kick us off, Jade?
Yeah. I can't speak from a science STEM perspective because you guys are very impressive, but I could never do what they do. But I think embracing social media is really something that needs to come to the forefront for a lot more federal and even state government jobs. I think the private sector does a really good job at embracing the fact that social media is a huge part of the day-to-day life of people. I mean, companies that I talk about all the time are companies that have like funny marketing or funny Twitter accounts or things like that keep people involved and engaged, and also, letting people know. Like, I know Dr. Adams' press conference was a huge deal for the ignition because he took a super complex idea that most of us probably don't understand and was able to explain it, which probably helps he was a professor for so long. But, taking it and taking the big ideas of the National Nuclear Security Administration's big ideas and then turning them into something that gets people excited and gets people invested.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks. Omar?
I think Jade is being very humble in her, assessment of herself. Of course, Jade has a lot of accomplishments on herself, but I think one of the things that I can definitely say is, kind of as a student of culture, is I think we really have to take a look at our culture and decide what is it that we want to be, right? What do we want to strive for? And of course, we also just have the NASA's just kind of, as a design pattern that we can use. Let's borrow some of their elements and see what's working for them and try to maybe mimic them. Of course, what do they say? Copying or whatever it's a flattery, or it's flattering, right? So I think that's one we can do is change our culture, and I think broadening our efforts in hiring, right? So maybe you see a lot of people that maybe have gone to Stanford or those big Ivy League schools, and perhaps maybe we're going to find great talent at even state schools, perhaps, right? So I was fortunate enough to go to a UC system school. I went to UC Santa Barbara, but I also went to a Cal State school, right? So we can go to maybe the smaller schools that maybe aren't highly publicized or referred to as big, scientific or even social powerhouses, right? So that's one thing. And I think once we broaden that, then we can also look into being more diverse and more inclusive, right? So again, broadening those efforts, we're able to find talent where maybe we're just not looking. Maybe there is talent perhaps somewhere in a small town in Iowa, or maybe somewhere in Rhode Island that we're just not looking, right? So really broadening those. And I think it also takes a collective effort, right? So HR or even public affairs or the recruiting department can't be responsible for all of it, right? It takes really, truly all of us for this effort. And, tell the people that you're around, like, hey, I work at the NNSA and it's a great place to work. And if you know anybody, we're hiring, right? But of course, we have to just start opening it up to people. So I think those are probably the top three that I would say.
Sure. Thanks. Bryce?
I think I piggyback on Omar in the recruiting. And I think there's two places to look, kind of as both mentioned, the final semester of college. What do I do with the rest of my life? You hit them there. But I think we also got to look younger, right? You need to look in the high school realms to get them interested, so they're going into college looking for that degree. Because hitting them that last semester of college, that pool is what you got. I don't think many people want to change their degree at that point and spend a couple more years. Maybe some do. But in the high school time period, show them what it is, what the environment is. And hey, if you want to do this, this is the degrees, the path that could take you there. Or if you're interested in this is the path you could take. I think that's one. I think the other one is kind of like what Omar said, is having not only NNSA, but the labs partner with universities and establish that constant relationship where they're working with each other. They're passing off science projects and different things back and forth to almost be, in essence, a feeder into those career fields.
Yeah, it's funny. I've got a 12-year-old son, and I was in the Navy, well before he came along. And so he's decided he wants to be in the Navy. And then he says, Dad, but I want a job that whenever I get out of the Navy, it pays at least $150,000 a year. That's what he said. So I said, well, bud, there's really probably only, 2 jobs in the Navy that will do that. And you can do some pretty, high flying cyber work, or you can be a reactor operator. You can work on nuclear reactors. He's like, yeah, that's what I want to do. And I said, okay, bud. Well, if you want to be a reactor operator, then you need to be really good at math. And he's like, man, I don't know. I don't like math that much. He's good at it. But I'm like, it'll all make sense, Wyatt. You'll understand how to run nuclear reactors if you just get through this initial stuff, and then then it all makes sense later on. So he's like, okay, I can do this. And so my 12-year-old son is settled on being running reactors on submarines. And what I see though out of this, and this goes to your point, Bryce, is that a kid that young is now more committed to learning and understanding the math required, because at 12 he sees a purpose to it, 7-8 years in the future. And
Right.
so, it goes to that point of getting in the high schools, getting in these schools, going, if you look at some of the folks who have turned out to be some of the, the great leaders in the nuclear world, they came from, South Dakota farms, and they came from all sorts of places that were not sort of that blue blood, this is what's expected of you. They've come from places you never thought of. And it gets back to some of the point Omar and Jade, you guys made. And so, I totally agree. We're now at the 20-minute mark, so I've got to take a quick break. You're listening to NucleCast, and we're talking about recruiting and retaining talent, and we'll be right back. This episode of NucleCast is brought to you by the 15th Annual Nuclear Deterrence Summit. Come join NucleCast at the summit on February 13th through 15th, 2023 at the Hyatt Regency Crystal City, Arlington, Virginia. Industry and government experts will be discussing management of the nuclear security complex, stewardship of the nuclear stockpile, arms control negotiations, and strategic policy. Stop by the NucleCast booth to say hello. Executive producer Kimberly Charrington and I will be there interviewing guests for upcoming episodes. You can find a registration link to the Nuclear Deterrence Summit with a 15% discount on the NucleCast website at anwadeter.org/NucleCast. All right, so we are back, and we're with Omar Castillo, Jade Fortiner, and Major Bryce Akers, and they're fellows at NNSA. They're in the programs, 2 different programs there. We're talking about how do you retain, or how do you attract and then retain talent, because we're trying to build a National Nuclear Security Administration, a DOE, a DOD workforce that is full of lots of young, vigorous folks, because as the listeners from NucleCast know, those of us who have been in this business a while, we're all getting older. Fortunately for me, I've got great hair, and I'm pretty confident that as I even get older, that's not going to go away. I can't say the same for some of you out there listening. You're not blessed with the great hair I am. Now, Omar, Jade, Bryce, I didn't tell you this, but I am aspiring to be the Kansas City Northland's top middle-aged hair model. And so my aspiration is to be in one of those books that when you get into like great clips and you go through it, I want you to see my face in one of those books at some point. That's where I'm hoping to go. So, maybe one day you'll see me there. But until then, we're talking about, science and recruiting talent. So what drew you guys? So when we talked earlier, Jade, you kind of gave it was a happenstance. Omar, you knew about it because you had a previous internship. And then Bryce, you had a lucky IDE. This was an Air Force fellowship is a great one, and coming to DC it's a great opportunity. So if you want to sit back and think about advice think back to being in school, what would you advise young folks who are perhaps undecided? They're a first year, second year student in college. Maybe Bryce, you've got a young Air Force officer who hasn't really decided, are they going to stay? Are they going to go? What are they going to do? What kind of advice would you give young college students, young Air Force officers? Why don't we start with you first, Bryce, and then we'll go to you, Omar.
Yeah, Adam. So I think for young Air Force officers, especially in the nuclear career field, it's very small. Especially as for ICBM operators like myself, you've got three bases to do the actual mission. And that was a concern for a while, as people didn't know where do I go next. So I think a big part of it is like we talked about earlier, it's the awareness. And our functional team right now is doing a great job of raising awareness of all the different places where a 13N can go. The skills that you get as a missile operator work in many different areas. The attention to detail that you get, that focus. So I would recommend to them is not only look around both on the websites, on MyVector and the things they have, but talk. So many different places where you can go to just jump out a little bit and see a different aspect and see how other career fields, even other services, see the nuclear environment. I think that can, give you that opportunity to see what you do, how important it is, how others rely on that nuclear environment, that nuclear operations that you bring in. And it can do wonders to convince you to, hey, let me do one more, let me go one more assignment. Oh, that was great. Let me get another one. And you just get that first step in. I think it just kind of snowballs after that.
Yeah. Thanks, Omar.
Well, Adam, I definitely want to say when it comes to your modeling career, you got my vote. And once you let me know, because I know a couple people too. My supervisor, Brian, would definitely be interested. So in regards to the question, I think I would say embrace change, be flexible. I remember when I was younger, I aspired to be, working as the big four in accounting, right, in accounting consulting. And for one reason or another, it didn't happen, and I tried really, really hard to do this, but sometimes there are forces outside of us or even above us that for some reason it just doesn't happen, right? Maybe it's just not meant to be. And so instead of beating yourself up that why didn't you do that, what happened, right? It's better to maybe pivot and go into other things. And also, I would say embrace your strengths, right? We're oftentimes always looking at our weaknesses and trying to kind of work on those and make those better. That's important. I think it's definitely a great thing to do. But at the same time, look at what your strengths are and polish those and really make those be the things that distinguish you from everyone else, right? But most importantly, I would say be yourself. And again, just embrace change, because if you do embrace change, you don't know where you'll end up at. And sometimes it'll take you to some really great places. So that'd be my advice.
All right, Jade.
So I guess like a little short anecdote, 7-year-old Jade was going to be a dentist. There was never any other plan. I was going to be the best dentist the world has ever seen, the next tooth fairy, if you will. My junior year of college, I took organic chemistry, and suddenly Jade was not going to be a dentist ever. And I kind of thought the world was over.
Right.
And I think every day that is probably one of the best things ever. I had never really been rejected from anything or had to really redirect any sort of plan like that. I was always great at school, so it wasn't really an issue. And so that forced me to kind of be like, okay, so what are my options? And what am I good at? And I think similar to Omar, like sometimes you just need to step it up and embrace that you have strengths, and those are what you should really work on. Of course, I do think you should look at your weaknesses. You'll be hard pressed to find anyone at headquarters with a bigger heart for the national labs than me. I want to meet everyone that works there and personally thank them for all their smart science work. But I realized I can talk to anyone. I love reading. I love writing. I love working on big teams and also having small projects. And I think that there's a lot of jobs that allow you to do that, especially in the nuclear space, because it is such a small community. I have the opportunity to work with some of the smartest people I've ever met, which every day is a treat with them by my side. Even if they don't know my name, I know all of their names. So I think it's just kind of embrace the no. no's are just redirections. They're not hard stops. They're not doors. They're just windows.
So as we run out of time, let me ask each of you, and we'll start with you, Jade. As this fellowship comes to an end, and as you're looking to the future, what are you looking to do?
Yeah. So I am sticking around next year, so that's really nifty. I will be staying at NNSA.
All right.
Eventually, I'd really like to be a program manager of some sort. I really want to be a part of those big decisions, and I do think a change in management culture is one of the most exciting things coming on. I think people are getting happier and more joyous about sharing how impressive everyone is, and that's what I want to do.
All right. Awesome. Omar?
Well, like Jade, I will also be staying at the NSA for next year. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to serve my country. And I too, as well, long term, would like to first learn more about what we have to, we have such a rich history of nuclear, anything nuclear, right? And then leading up to the Manhattan Project and the 80s, 90s, the Cold War, what we're dealing with even today. So I definitely still want to learn more about that. I definitely want to travel more of the sites. There's still a couple of sites that I haven't visited, so that's a great opportunity to do. But then long term, of course, like Jade, I would definitely like to be a part of or be a program manager and really make those decisions that are needed, right? But more importantly, kind of fill in or backfill those roles that some of the people that are in our organizations have been here for a really long time, and they have this knowledge, and I want to be, for them to trust me to pass on that knowledge. So I think that's a big deal, very important to me, and continuing this trade that is what we do in nuclear, right? So hopefully, and making more memories, sticking around to meet more great, talented people like Jade was mentioning, and just making some more memories. So that's really what I look forward to in the next years.
All right. Thanks. Bryce, do you have your orders yet? It's probably too early, I think.
So I actually do know where I'm going. The plan was to stay in D.C., kind of like Jade and Omar wouldn't be at the NNSA, but probably go to the Pentagon. But we found out actually before Christmas we'll actually be moving, which was not the plan. But we'll be going down to Maxwell. Going to the School of Advanced Air and Space Studies.
All right.
So going down
SAS. All right.
Yeah. So going down there for a year and then moving again. So doing the 3 moves in 3 years. Most likely either back here or, we'll see what other options are out there. Of course, there's Stratcom or others like that. So that's what's next in the move.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. So I want to thank Omar Castillo, Jade Fortiner, and Major Bryce Akers for being on NucleCast today. And of course, I want to thank you, the listeners, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next show. Well, just had a great show. Hope you enjoyed it. And for those of you, because I know how many of our listeners are pretty senior folks in the nuclear enterprise, maybe our young folks that were on this show inspired you to think differently about attracting and retaining talent. I know there was a few points that were made that I hadn't thought about. And so I'm sure the same is true for you. So I hope you enjoyed it.
This has been a production of the ANWA Deterrence Center. Our executive producer is Kimberly Charrington, and this episode has been engineered and mixed by David Grunthal. Follow the show on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter at NucleCast. Listen, follow, and review the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.